This is the video for those who want to improve their factory exterior designs. Now in Satisfactory we can recreate realistic styles of buildings like Art Deco. This 20th century architectural style consists of simple geometric shapes that work well with square-like factory layouts in Satisfactory. In this video I would go over building tips for major architectural elements. And as example, I would be using 3 different buildings of 3 different scales. I would start with my smaller scale Heatsink factory, then I would cover my church-like coal power plant, and of course, finally we will examine my building techniques for my computer mega factory with Radar Tower skyscraper. This is a rather long video, and for your personal convenience every single architectural tip have its own timestamp. But to have the point of reference first, I would also cover a brief summary of Art Deco in real-world architecture and history. The term Art Deco refers to a design period that was popular in the United States and Europe in 1920s and 30s. Major examples in New York are Empire State Building, American Radiator Tower, and Rockefeller Center. Other examples are Los Angeles Eastern Columbia Tower and NBC Tower in Chicago. Buildings in Art Deco style were built in the United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, and even in the places like Cuba and Russia. But Art Deco is not only about huge monolithic like skyscrapers. It have examples in smaller scale with residential buildings, factories, and even cathedrals and churches. Some common Art Deco motifs include chevrons, pyramids, stylized sunbursts, zigzags, floors, and other geometric shapes. These triangular shapes on facades often were capped off with series of steps that eventually come to a point. Corners of buildings were often decorated with tower-like structures, and unlike follow-up of brutalist architectural style, Art Deco focused on unique decorations both inside and outside of buildings. Also as a side note, pyramid or ziggurat-like shapes of Art Deco often done due to building codes and regulations of the time period in big American cities. From its inception, Art Deco architecture tried to be unique, and even in the modern times it still captivates minds of many people, surpassing many follow-up architectural styles. And here we are in actual game with the first example of my Heatsink factory. And it was actually heavily inspired by a Breakwater Hotel in Miami. It is an example of smaller scale Art Deco building, and without further ado, let's go for the deconstruction of main architectural elements. So we start by just placing your first front wall. I'm using the windows. And here of course I delete the center point. And from this point I need to do the half steps to actually indent my windows, so you cannot do it by default with the foundations, but you can actually do it with the catwalks. You just snap your catwalks to the windows, and basically here is your half step. You just snap the foundations to catwalks, delete your catwalks, and just place your foundation. And here you have your indent windows. By the same means you can actually do the quarter steps as well. To do that, you actually need the perpendicular catwalk. So you place the perpendicular catwalk. And here you basically can do the actual quarter steps by snapping the foundations to the catwalks. So here example of the quarter step. After you are done with the front of your factory, the amount of floors that you want, the amount of window layers that you want, you can start working on your actual centerpiece. And to start working on that, I am placing the actual pillars just in the middle between 4 foundations, just in the crosshair. And from this point, you want to do 45-degree angle with the foundation. You can rotate foundation with the mouse wheel. And as you can see, we have double foundation, and we could not do really like center alignment. So to do the center alignment, we just basically delete our foundations, and we do another half step, just like on the windows. So we do use the catwalks, we place our half-step foundations, delete the catwalks, and here you have the basically point of reference where you can rotate your foundation to 45-degree angle. Here you have the actual angle. Now you can place the foundation beneath it, just to have the point, the flush point work, or whatever it's called. Here we go. So from this point you can actually start working on your angled centerpiece. So here's a metal pillar just between 4 foundations on 45-degree angle. Then you place your windows. Here we go with your angled windows. And we're starting to get there. And here I am doing just like, you know, basically this quarter step windows or something. And here's the example of challenges that you can face with the builds like that, with the corners, etc, etc. My original build was using actually, I think, quarter steps. So we arrived into this junction where everything just do not line up. But with the pillars, you basically can fix almost anything. And of course, to do that, we actually need to go to the original grid, to the actual not 45-degree one. And you place your pillars right here. And of course, as you can see, we could not really place the pillar just in the point where we want it. So we just delete one here and place another here. And here you have your junction to your main grid from 45-degree angle. Of course, we delete everything here to make everything prettier. So after we are done with the entrance, after we are done with merging our angles and doing enough column work on the sides, we need to finish up everything to get to some point. And it can be a bit trickier, but not really. So here we have our final height that I want from the sides. And just on top of that, we add actual the 8-meter angled foundations. Like this. Here we go. And this is basically your finishing touch on your top. Of course, you just do everything to reach the proportions that you do personally enjoy. For me, that is something like this. And of course, here you can start decorating with the signs, etc, etc. But here is your pretty much main entrance to the factory, and I really enjoy this layout. Basically, you can place the sign really high up so you can see the actual factory and what this factory do from far away, and it kind of sticks on the landscape while actually remaining a pretty low building. And by low, I mean you basically can fit almost anything here, like manufacturers, you can fit blenders as well, pretty much everything aside like refineries, but for refineries you definitely need something different. Of course, after you are done with your main entrance and main facade, you kind of need to decide on your actual corners, and this is kind of trickier, of course, especially if you want to go from these half steps to just plain factory wall, because, well, you could not do everything, like, it's just too much work. So this is a really easy way to actually cheat on your actual architecture over here. So once again we are using pillars, we are placing pillar just right into the middle. And of course here we will start doing some Art Deco-ish things over here. So here we actually will bring our middle column a bit further forward and place another column indented like that. And as you can see, we're already arriving into this more Art Deco-ish style, where you have like 3 elements and one element a bit higher and a bit forward. So this is like plain and boring. We need to decorate this a bit because, well, you know, like Art Deco. And to do that, so for example, I can use actual like pillars like that. But this is boring. This is full steps and really boring. So we need to do some kind of the half step. And to do that, swap to the vertical, place 2 foundations here, one here, just one. And we have our groundwork for actual half step fillers. Here you have another layer of foundations. And you can use that to actually place the half-step pillars. And by half-step pillars, I mean basically pillars like this. Here you go. So this is basically your half-step pillar. It makes your build way, way more interesting. And next question, how you do transition this fourth element into the sides that are not half-step. And this is pretty simple. Once again, you can use the pillars to basically cover like everything. So I place just another pillar like this. And here you can basically swap to small pillars like this. And you can do something like this. You can do the things a bit different. For example, you can swap to another gap. For example, I want to have this like half step gap, not the quarter step gap. And to do that, once again, you can just use right amount of pillars to basically merge everything into one point. And the next question is, how do you do your facades? And this is pretty much simple. I just do the metal pillars and the ordinary pillars, the concrete ones, in the succession. Like this. And I basically delete the foundation for the metal pillars. And as you can see, over here it looks a bit wrong. And you basically need to just add extra small wall. And everything will start looking way more better. And here's the actual building that I've done in my factory. Of course, as you can see here, we were doing the actual quarter steps. So I actually was able to do the triple windows and of course make the transition from 45-degree angle to my ordinary grid a bit more interesting. And of course I'm using this half step small pillars to merge with the big pillars. Of course the Art Deco tower-like structure over here that brings forward just a bit. And of course here I am transitioning with the small columns. Actually I'm using this decorative column to transition into the more structural columns. As you can see, yeah, this is transition into the plain facade. And the interesting part, of course, top of your building, make sure that your buildings are, your like front part is not just decorative. Make it look like it have actual function over here. So I brought it a bit further down into the building. I think it can be like brought even further down, in my opinion. And of course on top you can have this chevron style window rooftop. I basically using glass roof 2-meter angled build piece. And the chevrons is another theme for the Art Deco. There are a lot of chevrons on the Art Deco buildings. And of course, the interesting part about the Art Deco style, that this style was spanning in the 20s when there were a lot of like oil money, the economy was booming, and there was basically a lot of money spent on the buildings. For example, if you look on the Chrysler building, this is like insane amount of decorative things on that building. But in the 30s, you have the Great Depression, and basically people were downscaling the amount of decorative stuff, but still we're building in the Art Deco style. So sometimes you can see the buildings where the facade is really posh, but the back of the building is kind of meh. But nobody looks at the back of buildings, so you can kind of cheat on your decorative stuff, just transition into more plain on the sides and just basically almost nothing on the back. And this is kind of alright and kind of characteristic of the actual style in the real life. So not everything always pretty on all sides. And of course, in the next chapter, we are going to examine my church-like coal power plant. This is very interesting structure that can be scaled indefinitely. My personal power plant have 48 coal generators. So without further ado, let's go for the deconstruction of main architectural elements. So for the church-like coal power plant, I'm of course using dual coal generators on two sides. Pretty simple build. The side note that you actually want to line up your actual coal stacks to each other, not the actual generators, but the coal stacks itself. A bit trickier, but you can get there. I'm using a total of 8 foundations for my church-like coal power plant. And of course, let's start with the windows. And windows is actually a bit trickier. Of course, the whole building is brought upwards one foundation to have this sandwich layer. And here we have our entrance, of course, pretty simple to place. And on the Windows side, you can actually use the small walls to have, you know, like small adjustments. But the tricky part that actually not everybody is aware of right now, A lot of people doing the windows like that, so you're using basically your rectangular shape, and of course you are placing windows right inside. Here we go. Pretty neat feature, but actually this is boring, and because you want to place another window here, another window here, you will need to make the building a bit wider, and I'm not a fan of that. I wanted to make the actual build a bit smaller, and the surprise surprise, you actually can make the windows a bit more interesting. So here you can actually add the side wall temporarily, here as well. And you actually can do something like this. Do you see that? Haha! So you can make the smaller windows. Basically, you are doing windows that are indented, like here. So you can like play around. So I was using these small walls to actually bring everything to the level. I can work around, for example, this level to make everything flush, sort of flush, you know. So for example, I can do this and get the exact windows that I have in my showcase. Here you go, the window number 1. Of course, for the windows on the sides, you want to have those windows a bit lower than this window to make the whole structure look more interesting, so to speak. Of course, we are using inverted walls once again. And of course, we are bringing our windows a bit lower. But because we were a bit trickier with the small walls over here, we will be using the walls over here as our reference point to make our windows of equal size. Here we go. And we have the side window number 1. And of course, we need to start to add our columns, and the whole idea was to actually cover up our the coal stacks. And as you can see, here you need just to play around your actual reality that you have when you build it, so to speak. So here we are covering our seams, and as you can see, the coal stack is not lined up. So basically, I need to actually bring up my coal power plant a bit further into the building. And here's the desired effect. As you can see, the coal stack is basically hidden behind the pillar, which is the whole idea behind this build. And from this point, we can start working on our corner. And of course, we want to actually get rid of all seams that we have at the moment. Pretty simple. You just make this triple vertices Art Deco style structure on the sides, and everything kind of works together. Pretty simple. And of course, we want to work on our rooftop. You can work with the chevrons one more time. Of course, for this build, I went with the middle structure going upward. Here we go. And of course, sides going in the outer direction. You know the word. Here we go. And here are the sides. As you can see, we're already getting there. Of course, you can play around with the actual foundations. There are a lot of ways to play around the foundations. Of course, for example, you can actually kind of cover everything like that. There are a lot of you just can play around, and because I want to replicate it until the eternity for exact amount of coal generators that I actually need, and that amount can, well, you know, be a bit different depending on the build. And of course, here I went from the ground floor to actual my roof level, and this roof level of course will be determined over here. And as you can see, yeah, this is basically the whole thing over here. And of course And this is what I was talking about. Actually placing the ramp walls after you place the windows is way more easier than placing the actual windows after you placed your ramp walls. And of course here we are with our church-like coal power plant. What we done over here, of course we have the control room for everything wiring inside the coal power plant. Of course we have our pump backup, we have the power switch itself to separate this power grid from the main grid. And of course, as you can see, the coal generators are brought one level up, so we have the sandwich layer for our belt work for the coal, and of course everything is lined up behind the pillars, so the coal stacks are not really visible on the ground level and kind of incorporated in overall architectural style of the building. Of course, for the side, for the corners, I went with the sneaky cheeky tower-like structure over here, so I have one wall spacing before I go for the actual windows. And basically, as you can see, you can replicate the building until the eternity. But if you, for example, I think this building kind of looks a bit long, so proportions are a bit wonky. What you can do here, you can just basically indent building even further down, so it will look a bit taller, and that way it will not be so long visually. You know, just break up the proportions. Of course, on the roof, what I have done on the roof actually went not full glass roof, I went with the tar roof for 3 foundations, and then right in the middle I have the glass roof. Work nicely with the coal power stacks just right on the edge, so you have a lot of light inside, you have a lot of light from the windows, you have a lot of light from your rooftop glass roofs. And as you can see inside we have the wiring, which is neatly placed on the pillars, so you have a lot of variation to play around. And of course I'm spacing my coal stacks by actual water distribution, and of course I have enough space here to place my backup energy generation for my pumps, and of course you can place here fluid buffers, etc, etc. So this is pretty much my Art Deco-ish church-like style coal power plant. So in the next chapter, let's actually examine the biggest build on the list. This tower is actually 203 meters high, which is pretty realistic scale for 1920s and early skyscrapers. For actual main tower part of my computer factory, Art Deco skyscraper, whatever you want to call it, I'm using 5x5 foundation. Of course I'm using the pillars right in between all the foundations. So of course it is pretty simple, just put your foundation in the middle, not to the side, of course in the middle. Come on game, don't do it for me. Or do it for me, whatever you call it. And of course the corners are pretty simple, but the tricky part is all about the windows. Of course for the sides I went for the just plain wall, just to give it a look. But in the middle I want to have those windows, and of course as you can see, at some point you will place something not truly aligned, and it would be of course not what you want. But for the windows, if you just will go for the plain windows, I went for the main factory building like that, and it's kind of alright, but for the tower I went a bit further. So I actually want to indent the actual windows, and it's pretty simple. So the first 2 layers are pretty much your entrance, so nothing happening here. But for the second layer and higher, I actually used the foundations. So let's actually snap the foundations over here. So as you can see, so this is our kind of flush with the walls, the level that is flush with the walls, and it is really important that the windows that are placed will be placed not on the edge but indented into the build. And how you actually will do it? So as you can see on my build, I have the pillars flush with the insides of the build. So they are like that. So they are flush with the walls and flush with the foundations, and this is actually giving you pretty nice flush surface inside, and I'm really digging it. but how you can actually indent the windows, and it is a bit trickier. You can try to do this with the foundations. For example, you can actually go for your basic trick with the foundations. Here we go. So this is quarter step, and as you can see, this quarter step kind of brings me exactly where I don't want to be. So let's try it again. Here we go. And here is the actual quarter step that I required. Pretty simple. And of course, you basically now can place the window just right on the edge of your quarter step foundation. And here you have your windows. Simple as that. And from this point, you basically can continue your windows in any way, shape or form. And same can done on all sides. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You just flush your shiny metal framing with your big pillars, and you have your windows indented into. And at this point, you kind of can be happy with this look inside if you are not looking, if you are not using your tower for anything else. But you can actually go the mile further and make everything a bit interesting. You can be really sneaky and can actually put the window right in between those pillars, just right in the middle, so you have this foundation step just separating your facades. But it's kind of really impossible, as you can see, but you can actually use these small frame pillars and snap them to the sides of your big pillars. But you could not really snap the foundation to that. So basically what you want to do, you want to use your catwalks. And as you can see, you basically can snap the catwalk to the side. So you snapped your catwalk, you can already delete your pillar, and now you can place your foundation. And basically, you just achieved this small side step in between your metal pillars. And of course, you can not really easily, I usually do it sideways, you can place your windows like this. Here you go. So you can delete your groundwork for foundations. You can replace your actual foundations over here. And of course, you can zoop your windows. Here you go. And this is how you do the actual pillars that are more interesting than the default solution that I do for the main factory, which is of course easier to do, but this is way more better when you look at it. Here you go. So we have our ground level, we have half-step windows indented into pillars, and pillars that are basically flush inside with the main pillars and kind of makes these looks of the walls. So yeah, everything that I want from the facade of the building. For the tower itself, we are going with the 3x3 grid because we want to make this ziggurat shape like a lot of Art Deco buildings of this era have. And of course, here we will be using one more time the corner pillars. Pretty simple structure. And of course, my mouse doesn't work. Here we go. And of course, the same for all four corners. Simple. Is it even a word? So here we go. But where we go from this point? So from this point, we will actually be using the full frame windows. And we will basically fill everything inside between the pillars. Because placing the windows before the actual ramp walls is way easier than vice versa. So, and here, because I can use the random pattern, but because this building is really small in the actual top tower profile, I will be actually going for the symmetry. And by symmetry, I mean that I actually doing one row of ramp walls that are straight in the succession, and after that I'm going for the actual inverted ramp wall on the next row, and I will basically be altering so I'm not merging with anything. So that way I'm arriving at this like beam-like structure, sun shape that you can actually find in a lot of Art Deco decorations for the buildings. And of course, everything is repeating once more with ordinary walls. As you can see here, I messed up. So I basically delete everything here. I replace my window and continue with the pattern. And because 3 is odd number, we need to do something with our symmetry on the other sides. And basically what I do here, I just wrap around the whole ornament. Basically, if it was a normal wall, a ramp wall, then I'm going for the inverted wall. And you just basically need to keep the track on what side you are right now. And then everything will just wrap around quite naturally. And here we go. And of course you are continuing with your ramp walls like this, just altering between the sides. And of course the final touch is almost there. Here we go. And this is basically two sides of your tower. And of course what you can do with actual top, you want to have one layer of the walls to actually finish up your skyscraper. And when you will be finished, something will be really odd about all that. And just to make everything a bit more interesting, I'm using the metal pillars. So basically you are indenting a layer of metal pillars on the side. That way they kind of break up the pattern. The pattern is not merging into the actual pillars. And of course, on top you will be doing a bit more work than usual, but you know, nothing like super duper, because it's far away. The small quarter steps is not really visible at this point. So over here on top, probably you want to use something like pieces from the architecture, like painted beams, something like this, and basically paint it black. And of course this looks wonky, you just go upstairs and place it in the middle, so that way it will not look so wonky. Simple as that. This is the layout for the tower. And here we are in the actual factory with the actual tower finished. And of course here is my little hub with the drone hub. And of course once again we are using this chevron style rooftop windows, 2-meter ones, to create this nice chevron like pattern on the top of my build. Here for the sign that you saw in the showcase, I'm using once again those frame foundations to make it more realistic, so window could not really blow it off from the building. And of course here we have the looks, the close-up looks, how it actually looks all together. As you can see, those nicely placed windows are really nice with those foundations. It's really everything like works together. Here we go to the sides. As you can see, it's really nice detail. It's really hard to do, but it's totally worth it. And of course let's go for the top of my tower, just to see the whole detailing on the top, how everything is done. Here I have my railgun, which is too much power, honestly. And of course, here we are in the base of my radio tower with all the frame foundations. And of course, you can use some lights to your advantage, but here's a closer look on your actual details on the actual tower. Let's actually swap to that. Here we go. So here we have, of course, our frame pillars on the corner. We have our finishing the wall, and we have our painted beam over here, basically painted into black. And of course, the radio tower itself, you can play around it. So I basically made the ladder that leads to actual radio tower itself, so you can totally make everything walkable over here. Yes, yes, exactly. We're already in the radar tower, not radio tower. Why I call it radio tower? I don't know. Because it looks more like communication tower, not actual radar thing. And of course we can go all the way up, but, you know, we're already high enough. And of course, let's actually go downstairs, just to look up on the factory itself. And as you can see, here is another layer that is really important. So as you can see, I have this castle-like structure that you can often find on skyscrapers like that. Only downer here is that I wanted to place the actual statues over here, like on the actual Chrysler building, but current statues in game are just too small to actually be part of exterior decoration. Over here I'm merging the actual lights inside the pillars. I'm placing them right straight in the middle of the pillar and just building over them. That way I have nice exterior light feel on my factory. And of course, as you can see here, we have our indented windows. We have really nice 2 foundation, even like 3 foundation high entrance into my main base, my storage facility, my MEM, etc, etc. What I actually end up doing, this extra addition on the side, which is basically using the same pattern as the actual top of the tower. So nothing fancy here, I'm just using the concrete pillars to just frame this piece. Of course, I am making it one step forward so it's not flush with the whole building to break up the whole silhouette of the building, of the factory. And of course, over here I'm using, once again, like on the first build, I am using a lot of angled windows, and only difference here is that I'm using painting beams over the pillars. But I'm using the actual concrete pillars to actually hide the extra part of the window. As you can see, over here we have the extra window that will stick out of the walls, but I'm just covering it with the actual concrete pillars. Nothing new here, I'm just basically doing it side by side, just like on my first build, and I'm using different windows. And of course here our conveyor lifts just right in the middle, going into the conveyor walls from the sandwich layer that are straightly connected to your train depot. So this is pretty much it for all exterior features of this factory. If you do enjoy videos like that, well, give it a like and consider subscribing. This is not the last video about Satisfactory Update 5, I have several guides on my list, and of course the big guide about brutalist architecture. Yes, for example, this huge brutalist skyscraper have several rather interesting building techniques to this particular building. For example, this angled wall, yes, this is actually hard to pull off in Satisfactory, so if you want to be posted, you know, like bell notification, you know, functionality is there. But until the next time, you know, build a kick-ass factory, share it on Reddit, and of course, have a kick-ass day.